Hello and welcome to Buzz Banter. I'm Das Hat.
I'm Sam.
I'm Maya.
I'm Merlin.
And, well, this is another one of those later segments that we promised were coming, and so it's come. The Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings actually stands as a very interesting film series, simply because it's an adaptation that in many ways is better than the books. In certain
It
ways.
depends on how you look at it.
It's streamlining that works, because usually streamlining is for things to be more adaptive for people to go to. And when I first saw the first movie, I went with my stepmother and my dad, and my stepmother and my dad just don't get like certain those types of genres, but they loved it because it was so streamlined and you could just get everything. Like, it's not that it spells everything out for you, it kind of does a little bit, but it doesn't. I think this is the biggest thing that anything in media can do. It really doesn't treat the audience like idiots.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
Which is the most
so good. I love it when people do. But it's not overcomplicated to the point where no one will get it.
Yeah.
It's like finding that balance is so key.
Yeah, it's not trying to say you're so dumb, so we're gonna spell everything out, and it's not like so up its nose with you.
Yeah, definitely.
Censoring myself there.
Well, if you remember a while back, I made the point that you needed to have a good critic if you were doing an adaptation to kind of take apart the elements and see what works and what doesn't. And within the sphere of the Lord of the Rings novels, what doesn't work is the amount of irrelevant detail.
Yeah.
There is a massive amount of irrelevant detail. Now, let me say this. The Lord of the Rings novels were as popular as they were and are as beloved in the fantasy community as they are because at the time, fantasy literature was almost non-existent.
It invented a lot of terms, like the way elves are now. If it wasn't for Lord of the Rings...
It wasn't just
Lord of the
that.
Rings came out in... I was watching this in a documentary actually fairly recently. When Lord of the Rings came out in America, it was actually it was the sci-fi community that picked it up because there wasn't actually a
there was no fantasy
community.
But
but
that speaks to
but here's the very big thing. What they basically what Tolkien proved with Lord of the Rings, because prior to Lord of the Rings, with very, very few exceptions, you never had a complete fantasy world. Everything was grounded at some point in reality, that this is a fantastical story that happened over there. Frankenstein, the Canticle Tales, Grimm's fairy tales, they were all stories that happened somewhere else. Even Shakespeare's works. Macbeth and everything happened in Scotland while he was writing for people in Britain. It was always some sort of fanciful power, but it was still in the real world. Tolkien was the first in a very long time to come out and create a full and complete independent world. Much like you had been seeing coming out of science fiction, where they were going to other worlds. This was a fully enclosed and independent fantasy world.
I'd have to say that he also wanted to do something with the linguistics that he was teaching.
Yes.
He was teaching Old Norse. He was dealing with all this ancient poetry that got converted to a lot of the inspiration for his songs that you see in Lord of the Rings. A lot of the poems themselves. If you look at the references of the ring itself, right, it does remind me back of the Volsunga saga. There is a cursed ring, but he's done something really new with this concept.
Yeah.
Well, no, he basically merged that concept with the ring of Gygaines from Greek philosophy. But the big thing was, as a result of creating that full and complete world, he had to explain that full and complete world. And that's what was, at least I found, to be a major drawback in the novels, reading it in this day and age.
It is, sorry.
Yeah, I found that very different. I actually love all these different languages which are appearing in the novel. I think, like, for the owls and in the English, like, even when you're watching the movies, right at the beginning, when I think it's
Lady Galadriel.
Yeah, Lady Galadriel that's narrating, right? You hear it both in Elvish and you hear her in English coming in right after.
Yeah, but you have to, even when you're reading, like, because we're talking about the books, right?
Yeah,
it is beautiful. Even when you're reading the books, you read it knowing that it was written in a time before, like, so you get away with it, and that's why I have a really big problem with modern day fantasy that tries to imitate Tolkien. because we're writing fantasy in a different time. You have to write it in a way that fits
Well,
our time.
because we have the established tropes.
Yeah, so you know Wheel of Time
Like-
series?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So the reason, like, I know it's a very popular series, but I cannot take it seriously because it's trying to imitate Tolkien, which is fine, but in ways that aren't acceptable in today's time.
Well,
Exactly.
that's why I think like Game of Thrones does something completely off the walls, and not just with its fantasy element, but with its storytelling of killing off characters, where you don't feel like anybody's safe.
Yeah, pretty
It creates something new and fresh, and that's why it's so popular.
Well, it's not that it does it new and fresh. There have been other series that have done it that just haven't gotten popular simply because they weren't all that interesting. This was Game of Thrones is a good example of exactly what Tolkien did at his time, which was, even though if you research it, you can probably find other works that were their own complete separate world, but because his was interesting, critically good, and popular, it gained this sort of notoriety and it became the flagship for this.
Yeah,
Whereas
well,
Game
also-
of Thrones, you have the same sort of thing where prior to Game of Thrones, you are hard-pressed to find any sort of narrative story anywhere where the main characters are never safe. Someone's going to die. R.A. Salvatore is infamous for spending the last 20 years writing about the same characters. It's only 2 books ago that he actually started killing main characters off. And this is after, this is a man that's written for decades.
I don't know, man.
And only now is he changing his characters.
This type of style of
And
storytelling.
even then he's kept some from way back.
You like this style of storytelling is so close to Korean dramas. Like, the more you like a character, the more not safe they are in the series. They're gonna die, but when? And who? Which one? I like all the characters. Oh, you're not gonna enjoy this at all.
Oh.
But back to the film itself.
But you have to keep
Oh,
in mind.
Sorry,
yeah.
actually, I was gonna make a point. This is you guys were talking about how he takes away things from the books. The reason why the books work is because you couldn't streamline the book. You have to explain the world that you're in because you got to be descriptive. You don't have to be
Right.
descriptive
In
in
the
the movie
movie,
because you're
yeah.
being shown things.
Yeah.
And this is why the streamlining works because he, as you said, he takes out the useless elements like
The hill folk.
the hill folk, Galadriel's background, the relationships between races.
Tom Bombadil.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
that's
thing with
Yeah.
when he captures the moth, he's actually communicating with another wizard. Like the
Yeah.
whole thing with there's a
Yeah.
whole thing with wizards there, and how like Sauron wasn't the ultimate bad guy; he was
Yeah.
the lieutenant to the
Yeah,
ultimate bad guy.
It's aspect to aspect
Yeah.
storytelling, and he does it very well. It cuts time. I mean, when you're reading
He-
books,
he-
you can.
He keeps
Yeah.
it simple. You got your
Yeah.
protagonists, you got your goal, you got your bad guy, you got your bad guy's henchman. It keeps it simple without completely spelling it out. You still have to figure out things out themselves,
What's great?
and you create characters you love.
What's the great thing that Jackson did, and it's actually kind of risque. Like I know it's kind of weird to say because it's such a small detail. Is using grays instead of greens. Like that,
Right.
and that is such a.
No,
it makes
you're right.
it completely changes the feel of the movie because it is a fantasy movie, and every fantasy you see, even including Narnia, uses greens. You know, but Lord of the Rings is all gray, and this is one problem my friend had with it because he's like, it's fantasy, why is it all gray? But you know, it looks so good because it's all gray.
Well, the thing is, realistically, it
flames
would be all
and
gray.
stands out.
It's a very interesting thing that we seem to sort of idealize country living and the sort of out in the wilderness, the ye old times pioneer, or whatever you want to call it, medieval. But the thing is, living in that society, you do not have the advancements and everything to ease cleaning. And so you spend more time keeping things clean, so you don't have the time to frolic out in the fields. Everything's going to be grey because you can't get it out.
I love the.
But also, it makes
Yeah.
it makes it more grim.
Yeah.
This,
It-
Yeah. When
But
you-
it is a grim tale.
and
And
you-
that's the point. That's why it works so
Exactly.
well.
And even when you do those close-ups of Gandalf, if you look carefully, his hair, his beard, everything is disgustingly greasy. But that makes sense because bathing wasn't cool.
Yeah.
there's also no shampoo or conditioner back then.
Exactly,
Um,
but
would you
Frodo's hair is still so lush and full. It's got bounce. Look at it.
That could be a Hobbit thing. We'll just
No,
Alright,
the
alright.
elf, like he's
The
got
elves-
nothing.
the elves
the
are
elves.
the biggest ones for
They're the
those.
hygienic ones.
Yeah.
Well,
But
no, but they're
that makes
magically
sense.
hygienic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It makes sense because there are these elevated creatures.
Yeah.
You know, that's why they're clean, they're glowing, they're white with
They
blonde
live-
hair and blue
uh,
eyes.
They also have to live with themselves for centuries, so they
Yeah.
better be able to live with themselves.
Well,
Um,
it's not just that. They are blessed by the gods. When in the third film, when Arwen is when the ship leaves that Arwen was supposed to take, and she suddenly falls, her father says, "The grace of the Valar is leaving you." well, the Valar are their gods. Each and every elf is given a portion of godly might to bless them and keep them safe.
That's the thing they kept out of the movies, which was, you don't need that in the movies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as soon as you say the grace of the
walking
Valar
on
is
top of
leading, you
snow.
instantly understand
People complain about what they left out, but the thing is, you don't need that. One of the
Yeah,
things I loved about the movie Chronicle is like, what was that thing in the ground? Well, that wasn't important to this part of the story in the movie. What was important is what they were doing with their powers.
that. Right.
And this is why Lord of the Rings kind of exceeds, is because they create, this is something some movies do really well, is they create a world where certain physics, certain things work in this world. This is where leaps of faith come in, where you can't, you don't have to put everything that would be realistic in our world in theirs. Like, you can take some liberties. You still have to keep it somewhat there, like gravity. Like, gravity still has to play a role.
Yeah.
But, I mean, and this is where he gets that perfect, you were mentioning the perfect balance. He got that perfect balance of disbelief and reality together, because it is a fantasy movie, but it still has to have some form of, like, reality. These are still people. You're still looking at human beings.
And what Jackson does really well, which is kind of not really addressed in the book, is this idea of, like, the East is not completely all evil, because there's humans in the East, right?
Exactly.
And the shadow of the East, right?
It's not addressed in the book as well, because, you have to understand Tolkien was raised in this time where it's, like, white dominance and then everyone else, right? But in the movie, well, not in the movie, in the extended version of the movie,
Good times.
there's this scene where Faramir's like,
That
who's his family?
Easterling,
Yeah,
yes.
where did he come from? And you notice that he's a Middle Eastern guy. And it's just like this moment, and I love that they added this, even though it is an extended version, I love that they added that in, because it's like this key moment saying that, like, now we know, like, there's people in the East, and these are men in the East,
But
right?
it does more than that, because it's something that you don't really find in the books. Within the books, Boromir's the favored son, but Faramir himself is a very charming, charismatic captain of the guards, and you really find no reason why Denethor would hate Faramir. But he does in the books, but there's no explanation given. But when you see it in the film, Faramir's attitude that war will make corpses of us all, his brother was the leader. He's the one that became captain because he enjoyed doing that. Faramir is in that role because he is the son of the steward. And he rather would not be there.
Yeah.
Well,
He is a good ruler, but he is not a good soldier or general. He can do the job well, but he does not want to be there because he realizes just how horrible it is. It is not a place for glory.
Well, you could also make the argument that he is maybe sometimes a smarter leader, because one of the things he says, like,
he really is.
he wants his, the guy wanted to take Faramir and to retake Osgiliath, and he even guilts him into that by saying Boromir would do it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that was not a smart move. You're essentially getting a killing field. I mean, you can easily see any person with any sort of strategic knowledge would know.
Right.
Like, you're essentially settling them on a killing field where they're on a
But
basic thing.
but
Like, and the
essentially-
smarter move is not to go. You gotta
Yeah.
let them come to you,
But-
where you're gonna be safe.
But you see that in the film and you don't see it in the book, where these are two different types of leaders. Boromir would inspire his men to go headlong into that charge, and just like you have the Riders of Rohan, that as they're dropping to incoming orc fire, they keep coming because they've consigned themselves to death. They can't be stopped. And that's the sort of leadership that Boromir inspired in his men, whereas Faramir, he led very practically, and he said, no, when we're going to die, it's better to retreat. And he leaves Osgiliath on 2 separate occasions. And it's only when he's guilted into going back that he actually goes back. Otherwise, left to his own devices, he would have left them at Osgiliath.
Well, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say. Well, that kind of just speaks to how. Remember, I was telling you about how they don't spell everything out.
Yeah.
This is all just interpreted.
Exactly.
Because you really only see Boromir in the first movie, and you kind of get that.
You
he's
get
very
his extended
outspoken.
in the second.
Yeah,
You got the
everyone
extended.
parts
Yeah,
Yeah,
but for
it's
most
so
people, they
great
don't
with-
see the extended.
Yeah.
Most people have just seen the movies.
If you
So
have
get
not
that.
seen the extended, watch
You
the
should see-
extended.
You should see the extended.
It
They're
adds
on
a lot.
sale at
But
Walmart
the-
because
but-
it's Father's Day.
But just the point that it's just in the movies themselves, without the extended, you still get that feel, and this is Peter Jackson's credibility to how
Two
good of it.
brothers.
Yeah, he gets that,
Yeah.
and you get that when he's talking about the ring, how he's the first one to speak when it's placed,
Yeah.
and he's the first one to be so, abrasive about it. We should use it, and he's got
Yeah.
this whole speech
Think of all
prepared
this
essentially.
power he could
So
use.
essentially, you get all of Boromir's character in this one scene.